everyone. Welcome to Easy Peasy with the Smithsonian. I'm Allison Leitner. I'm an instructional designer here at the Smithsonian, and I'm here with my colleague Tess Porter, as well as Jim Reese from the Washington International School and Aleah Myers from DCPS. Today, we're continuing in our series where we model thinking routines from Harvard's Project Zero. Aleah joined us on Wednesday, and we looked at the 3 whys, and we're going to be looking again at the 3 whys here on Friday. So before I turn it over to Tess, I want to ask you a social emotional learning question to get us started. And I'd like you to use the chat to type in, what does it mean to you to be human? Tess?
Thank you so much, Allison. Hi, everybody. My name is Tess Porter, and I'm an educator here at the Smithsonian. As many of you know, this is one in a series of webinars we've been holding for the last few weeks, twice a week. All of those sessions have been archived, and you can find them either on our YouTube or Facebook pages or by searching the Smithsonian Learning Lab for Easy Peasy. Each webinar comes with a collection of resources located on the Learning Lab. Throughout the bulk of today's session, I'm going to be hiding behind the scenes screen, sharing the collection of resources we developed for today's session. It includes resources that we're going to talk about and other resources that'll provide some more kind of context and extension opportunities. But I'll be back at the end to walk through that collection and everything it holds at the very end of the session. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim.
Hi, thanks, Tess. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. We're excited to have Aleah back with us for the second webinar on using thinking routines in the science classroom. And one thing I hope you'll notice from what we're doing today, and if you saw Wednesday's webinar, or if you have a chance to go back and look at it, that these routines that she's using, while they have a great applicability in the science classroom, they also have what I like to call legs, in that they are applicable across different subject areas and across grade levels. And I think you'll see all kinds of opportunities in what Aleah shares today and what she shared on Wednesday for these explorations having interdisciplinary possibilities, so that teachers from a number of different subject areas could think about how they could do something similar or adapt it quite easily into their own context. I work at Washington International School, and we've had about a 20-year relationship with Project Zero up at Harvard. And I personally have had a relationship for a little bit longer than that through work I've done in a variety of different schools and contexts. And this is the 8th year that we've had a group in DC called DC Project Zero, which brings educators together to explore how these ideas translate into our own practice. And so it's wonderful to have Aleah as a representative of that group, DCPZ, and as someone who's been involved in a number of different projects that we've led at Washington International School to be part of this today. So Aleah, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce what you're going to do.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, and hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Jim really made it clear, but I just want to reiterate a little bit just how committed I am to building my students' global competence. And that's something that I really didn't want to stop or waver during this period of distance learning. So the thinking routines that we are going to be practicing today really do promote that cultivation of global competence, but also really promote student engagement and buy-in, which is just so important now as it ever has been. But these routines that we're going to be practicing are some of my favorite, both in the classroom and at home. And before we get started, I just want to mention that today's activities come from a Learning Lab collection that I created for my high school advanced biology class. And Tess will share a little bit more about how to access that collection later. But overall, the goal of this collection is really just to think about and consider 2 questions. And the first one is, what does it mean to be human? And the second one is, why does this idea of being human matter? And with that, we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing that we are going to do is just to take a look at this skull and just to do a little bit of noticing. Just take a close look at the image. You can scan it from top to bottom, left to right, and just make any observations about it. As everyone's just taking a look, I would just like to note that this is an introductory activity that I would do with my students to kind of get them thinking about human evolution. So if the things that you're seeing, if you're not quite sure how to describe them, that's okay. If the terminology isn't technical, that's how I would kind of build some of this technical vocabulary. So as we just take another second to look, we can just try to make 3 observations about what we see in this skull. And Jim, if you don't mind getting us started, just 3 things that you notice.
Sure. So I notice this sort of rounded area at the top of the skull. So it's quite rounded, almost looks molded. That's one observation. Right. And then the second one is this kind of heavy brow. So this the skull seems very heavy at this. It creates this kind of edge here above the sockets for the eyes, and that's very noticeable to me. And then I'm noticing it's something I noticed that's not there, and I'm noticing that at the mouth there's not a jawbone. The jawbone is missing, so I'm just not seeing that. So I'm seeing a mouth which ends with the upper teeth.
Sure. And thank you so much, Jim. We're just gonna now kind of switch gears and take a look at a different skull. So again, here we see a different skull. Tess is clicking through some of the images so we can see some different views of that, which is a feature that I absolutely love about how these skulls are formatted on the Learning Lab. But we're just going to do some close noticing again and make some observations about this skull. And when you feel as though you're ready, you can feel free to type some of your observations into the chat box. And Jim, when you're ready, you can feel free to share 3 more of yours.
Sure. So one thing I noticed that stands out for me right away is the teeth. So the teeth are not uniform in terms of size or sharpness. So there are these really sharp teeth on either side of the front teeth. So that really stands out for me.
Absolutely. We do see these very sharp canine teeth.
Right. And I noticed this really strong jawbone, whereas in the other one, the jawbone was missing. I see this really strong, pronounced jawbone at the bottom.
Absolutely. And I might even push forward to say that I kind of see a snout, or what I would call a snout.
Right.
As well.
Yep. So that area that contains the cavity for the nose, it's slanted in a way that the other one was flatter. So it feels slanted, almost like a snout or something. Yep.
Yeah, and Brianna in the chat also noticed there's a crest on the top.
Absolutely. So we definitely see that ridge, or what we'd call a sagittal crest. And really, we're starting to move into this comparison. So what I would do next with my students is I would try to push them to keep any observations about this skull to being solely about this one. But when we're ready, we jump to comparing the 2 side by side. So again, we're just going to do some close noticing. And when we're ready, just make 3 comparisons between the 2. These can be things similar, different, but when you're ready, just feel free to type in the chat box. And Jim, when you're ready,
sure,
feel free to share yours.
Yeah. So the 3 things that stand out to me in terms of contrast are things that I was noticing already. So the brow, so with the while there's this kind of we have that crest on the lower figure. On the other one, it's much more pronounced. It's kind of stands over. It's still kind of a crest, but it's I don't know. The shape of it is different, and the formation of it is different. So the brow is different.
Sure, absolutely.
And then the teeth are very different. Again, while we don't have the jawbone on the top figure, you can see a really strong contrast in the teeth. The lower teeth on the top figure, or sorry, the upper teeth on the top figure are very uniform, almost the same in size and in shape. Whereas it's very, very different. The teeth are not uniform with those canines, and then the other teeth are different shapes. So that stands out for me. And then the third thing is looking at the cranium, as I mentioned, on the upper figure, where it's so rounded, it looks almost molded. That's missing from the lower figure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, Jim, you mentioned a number of things that in the classroom I would push students to think about, well, why do we see these differences in teeth? What inferences can we perhaps make about the diet of these two different species? In terms of the cranial shape, what could we say about maybe brain size based on the different shapes that we see there? Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we go on, I do just want to mention, if I was doing this in the classroom with students, we would look at a variety of skulls. We would probably sort them into human versus non-human, and then take a look at these using a thinking routine, such as 10 times 2, where we're making a lot of observations, or see, think, wonder, or what makes you say that. And I would really be pushing my students to be making these observations and then supporting their claims that they're making with some evidence that they see in the physical skulls. So with that said, the next thing that I would do is just to share a little bit about each of these skulls. And Jim, would you like to take a guess at either of the species that we're seeing here?
Yeah, I would guess that the top one is a human, and that the lower one is some kind of ape.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that top skull is actually known as Peking Man. So he was found outside of Beijing and lived about 400,000 to 7,800,000 years ago, and is actually a member of Homo erectus. So early hominin species. And then the second skull is a gorilla. So what a modern day gorilla skull looks like. So the real goal of this is really just to think about these physical differences and what would make us a member of this genus Homo, and what would make us physically and biologically unique. So in trying to make sure that we stay on time for this webinar, we are going to jump ahead kind of in two senses. So for the sake of time, we are going to kind of transition from thinking about what it means to be biologically and physically human, now to think about what it means to be socially human. And the thinking routine that we are going to be using to do that is called the 3 Whys. And if you're not familiar with this routine, what it does is really asks students to think about why a topic of investigation or study matters, and why it matters in 3 different contexts. And I love this routine because it really promotes the student engagement and motivation. So let's just jump right in and think about that. So the first question I would pose is, why does the idea of being uniquely human matter to you? And I think that there's a lot to unpack here. So take a second just to think, why does being uniquely human matter on a personal level? And feel free to type your thoughts into the chat box, and Jim, when you're ready to be my model student here, you can go ahead and share what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think so. For me, it brings up all kinds of issues I'm trying to think on a very personal level, just in terms of the way I go about doing things and making decisions, philosophical, ethical implications, and that kind of thing. So it just makes me think about what makes me uniquely human, or what concerns me about being uniquely human is I think about the differences between human beings and other types of animals or other types of species.
Absolutely. And I think that really ties in this idea of the connection between socially human and physically or biologically human, just considering the differences between different species, and of course ourselves as the last and only surviving human species.
In the chat, Jan mentions that she always wants to be a better human. So in that sense, the response to the question, being human and feeling certain kinds of responsibilities, it makes you want to be better at this thing we call being human. It also makes me think about, having looked at the skulls first and then thinking about this idea of evolutionary development, it makes me also think about why am I the way I am? It caused me to think about that, and certainly on the biological level, it leads to that. But I think on the social level and on the kind of ethical level and other things, like how did I become the way I am? What influences are there, not only biological but also social or societal?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, for me, it just brings up this nature of humanity and how kind of I fit into that idea on a personal level. So absolutely. The next question would be, why does this idea of being uniquely human matter to those around you? Or why does this idea matter in your community?
Yeah, my first thought on that one is thinking about how we organize ourselves, and so, in my community, I feel I belong to a number of different communities. Several come to mind right away. So I live in a neighborhood, and I live in a building with a bunch of other people, families, and individuals. I also work in a school, so there's a community there. So I'm thinking about how we organize ourselves and behave in relation to one another. And so in that sense, what it means to be human is important in terms of how we set up rules and how we set up codes of behavior and that kind of thing. So it seems to be about existing together and existing in a positive way together.
Yeah, and Jan in the chat is also saying she thinks it matters especially about food versus not food. What do we treat as food versus pets or companions? Brianna says it matters. It can highlight the things we have in common since we're all humans. And Abby reiterates this idea of community. It makes us a community despite all of our differences. We have this very essential thing in common.
Absolutely. And I think these ideas of, again, interconnectedness, highlighting differences, but also really the similarities that do bring us together and make communities and our communities function. I think that these are just strong ties that would definitely come up in the classroom as well. My first thought is this idea of the pets versus humans versus these different relationships too, and how close some of these relationships can be. So definitely these interactions are coming up for me a lot as well. And then really the third question that we are going to think about is, why is this idea of being uniquely human important on a global or in a global sense? So why does it matter to the world?
Yeah, I mean, this whole pandemic and the crises we're going through, the health crisis and the economic crisis, and I'd say a kind of existential crisis that we're going through as a human species, affects us, and certainly we have had a hand in spreading the virus as humans. It also makes me think about the interconnectedness in a global sense, not only on us among humans, but the idea that the virus might have been transmitted from animal to human. It brings up this idea of how we behave in the world, and how something that could happen somewhere, we don't know exactly where, but somewhere far away in the world, can then come and have a very powerful impact and negative impact on me here sitting in my dining room. So it's making me think about our responsibility as humans, but also our connection with other species.
Absolutely. And I think this question for me really brings up feelings of how small our world can really be, especially when we think about the pandemic, and really just how fast things can travel, whether that's actual physical human travel or something like a virus. And I think a theme of what we're kind of bringing up here is this idea of responsibility, and the responsibility that we have to each other, to other humans in our community, to other humans around the world, and really just this unique ability that we have, that we could help. And I think that this idea of humans helping other humans, where other species might not have that same level of ability to do that, is something that really, really resonates with me about this question.
It also seems to imply a strong responsibility. So if we've been endowed with certain abilities that other species don't have, then along with that comes a certain kind of responsibility. And it just feels, Jan mentioned war as, it brings up war for her in terms of this global implication. And Abby talked about the impact we have on other species and on the ecological systems of the planet. And so that kind of responsibility that we have not to, if we're going to be responsible for destroying ourselves, then we should have a responsibility not to destroy other things. And it seems that we often lose our way. And this is a moment in which I think there's a really strong pause for reflection to think about that responsibility.
Oh, yeah, and Billy also sort of said a similar thing, that with the COVID effects on the environment now, when we're not traveling, we've seen the impact of reduced human impact on the environment. So how much do we affect each other and when we're going about our normal lives?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that this is coming up, and that's really where my head goes immediately as well, being an environmental science and biology teacher. And kind of where this project goes when we do it in the classroom is it's really the end of our evolution unit and a bridge to talking about ecosystems and environmental impacts, and human impacts. So really just kind of starting this thinking about how we impact our environment and how we change our environment and how we use natural resources, with this idea that we do have this really unique power and responsibility to make decisions that are going to be sustainable, and helpful to our planet, to others around the world, and kind of really just going into that unit with that kind of a mindset. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say one thing, Aleah, it's making me think about as well is when I've used this routine, one way I've approached it too is once we've explored these different aspects of the whys, like why me, why my community, why does it matter to the rest of the world? It lends itself to then saying, so if we want to know more about this topic or we want to take an exploration in different directions, what do we then need to be able to know. So there's an opportunity, I think, for further exploration. It builds up an interest, as you were saying earlier, and engagement, and then sets the stage for doing further exploration. And Jan was just asking, do you have any trouble getting high school students to go in depth with the 3 whys? Do they, in your experience, do you find that they are able to go deeply with some of these topics, or to want to go deeply with some of these topics?
I think that is really a fantastic question. And what I found is that breaking the questions down when we're kind of introducing a topic. So if we would be moving from this idea of evolution into human impacts, breaking the question down and thinking, okay, let's take a moment, pause. Why does this matter to you? And really only presenting one question at a time kind of pushes them to go deeper. And by giving them a pretty significant amount of time to just really focus on one question, kind of helps get that deeper thinking going. A lot of times before we talk about it as a class, I'll have students share and talk amongst themselves, whether it's a turn and talk or in their small groups, so that they're really, really being pushed to take their thinking from just surface level, well, it matters to me because I'm a human type of response, to some of the responses that we're thinking about and that we're talking about today. So yes, I've definitely encountered that challenge, but I think that time is really the key for making sure that students are able to do these or to able to really unpack the questions. And I think another thing is really just using the routines again and again and again as routines. So once we've done 3 whys several times, students know that they're not going to just be able to give that surface level answer and move on, that we're going to be pushing the thinking farther and getting deeper into it.
And it also seems to me that high school students especially, but I think students of any age, are able to bring in their own knowledge and understanding of history, of literature. I think the other subject areas can play a role in having in their discussions and thinking about literature that has to do with say a science fiction literature or dystopian literature that talks about how environmental damage can lead to the destruction of the species and those kinds of things, or understanding how humans have evolved and how humans have used their unique position as a species to do good in the world, but also to do poorly in the world, and so they can bring those examples in and can generate a lot of background information that helps in their understanding of biology.
Absolutely, and I think that that's one thing that I love about this routine in particular. As long as students are unpacking the question, they're not feeling wrong. And I think that sometimes what might want them to stick to the surface level answer is to think that their thoughts might not be viewed as correct or as scientific or biological. And this routine really promotes that interdisciplinary thought and allows their minds to kind of just wander wherever they want to take it, which I think is so important.
Great.
To being actually engaged in science content, making those connections.
Great. All right, well, we're almost out of time, so we're going to invite Tess back, who's going to take us through the collection that she's created for today, and then give you a taste of what Aleah has created on the Learning Lab as well. So Tess, it's all yours.
Hey, thank you. And thank you so much, Aleah. That was really fantastic. I want to take a moment to say first that, as I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar will be archived. So if you want to rewind it or share it with a colleague, you can find the archived version at the link you're watching it at now, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook. You'll also be able to find it on the Learning Lab itself. This webinar also comes with a collection of resources located on the Learning Lab. I've added a link to this collection in the description for the webinar that you're watching now. And in the last couple of minutes we have together, I'd love to kind of walk through what you'll find here. So at the beginning, we've pulled in the 2 resources that Aleah led us through looking at. Each one of them has information from the museum attached to it about what it is. We've also pulled in the thinking routines we used. And on each of these, if you click on the information button, you'll see information from Harvard that talks about the types of learning that these routines support and suggestions for using them in the classroom. So pretty similar to what Aleah shared with us today. Additionally, alongside a video about the power of Project Zero thinking routines and links to the archived version of this webinar, the thing that I think is the most important here is we've included a link to the what does it mean to be human in the Anthropocene collection that Aleah mentioned that she created and used with her students. This includes some of the information that Aleah talked about, such as ways that she would extend this kind of activity and pull it into a longer unit with her students. So when she mentioned that she uses other examples of skulls here and a sorting activity, she's actually built this in as well. What I love about this collection is she's also done a really great job organizing and scaffolding it to make it clear kind of where all of the pieces are and what the big ideas that students will be digging into are associated with each resource. So I would highly recommend checking that out. And again, the link to this collection is located in the description of the video that you're watching now. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Allison.
Thanks, Tess. Thanks so much, Aleah, for joining us again. This was really great. And I think it's really great to see these thinking routines used from science as well as the other disciplines that we've gotten to see them in over the last couple of weeks. Our last week of Easy Peasy with the Smithsonian starts on Monday. So we're going to have another session on Monday and another session on Wednesday, both at 1 p.m. So we hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a good weekend.